Let's talk about her basics first. Or projection. Using her psionic power, she can send out small projectiles that travel up to 30 meters away before returning back to her in the process. These pass through all enemies, dealing damage without fall off, as well as allies, healing them in the process. And a quick tip for this: you want to position yourself in key positions with this ability. So you always want to be able to not only heal your teammates, but deal damage at the same time. Again, this ability passes through all targets at max range. Agile Strike. This is her 3-hit combo. The third hit will knock back enemies. Pretty straightforward, but a good tip for this is if you're about to get dove by a tank or maybe even a flank, swing twice, to start the combo and release the third hit when they pounce on you. And you can hold the third hit for about a second and a half. All right, let's talk about Guardian Shield. When looking at an ally, you can generate a shield that not only blocks up to 300 damage, but also heals any ally close by and yourself. Any enemy that passes through the shield will be slowed down temporarily. You can recast this ability over and over, but keep in mind it won't regenerate HP unless you recall it. Once recalled, the ability will then enter a cooldown period, with its duration increasing on how low the shield's HP is when activated. If the shield is destroyed, it will trigger a fixed cooldown of 6 seconds. So for a quick example here, if the shield has 200 HP remaining once recalled, it will go on a 3-second cooldown, but if the shield is recalled at 50 HP, it will be on a 5-second cooldown. This is one of her best abilities in her kit, but I would say it's one of the hardest to master. So get a lot of practice in with this ability, maintaining the HP, figuring out when to recall and who to place it on. Force Physics. This ability has two functionalities. You can either push all enemies in a line away from you, or you can utilize a secondary attack which instead pulls enemies towards you. They both deal the same amount of damage. This ability has huge potential since you can not only knock enemies off the ledge of the map, but you can either push or pull enemies into attacks or ultimates, that otherwise would have been able to escape. Her passive: you will enter invisibility after disengaging from combat for 5 seconds and grant yourself healing over time. For anyone who may not know what being in combat means, is using abilities, taking damage, or dealing damage. So any of these actions will not allow you to activate your passive. So a quick tip: if you're really out of position, or if you're looking to flank, to rotate safely, to stop moving for 5 seconds so the enemy team can't hear you, and then once invisible, you can execute what you're planning on doing. And 5 seconds is a long time, so this is where failed step comes in clutch. This is a double jump. When performed, you will activate your passive, allowing you to reposition or get out of sticky situations. Keep in mind, when invisible, if you use any abilities or get hit, you will be taken out of invisibility. And a nice tip here: you can use this to traverse the terrain, to reposition, or if you fall off a ledge, you can jump back up to safely depending on how low you drop. Psionic Vortex, one of my favorite abilities in her kit. This ability allows you to fire a projectile that will erupt into a vortex when it either hits a surface or when you manually trigger the ability again. This AoE will deal continuous damage over time while also slightly drawing enemies towards its center. Not only is this skill potent when used on groups of enemies, but can also function as a really strong zoning tool, which is why I love it a lot. So placing it in doorways, Punisher turrets, on flying characters such as Storm and Iron Man, and the enemy healers, this will just always force them to different positions and then make them more vulnerable in those team fights. And just a quick tip here: you can combo this with Force Physics to maximize your damage, you throw this out and then you pull them in to the orb when they try to escape. Her ultimate ability, Invisible Boundary. You'll be able to place down a large AoE in a chosen area that causes you and all allies to become undetectable by enemies outside of that area, while also providing significant healing over time to all allies inside, and enemies can also enter into the AoE, allowing them to see your teammates inside, but they will be slowed as well. Enemies can also still deal damage to players inside. The AoE from outside, they won't be able to see where you are or who they're hitting though. Let's talk about her team up ability. So she will grant the Fantastic Four team a passive damage resistance and an active ability. The ability provides the heroes with temporary bonus health that regenerates continuous for its duration. Once the Human Torch and the Think are introduced, they will also be able to utilize this ability. Now let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's talk about the goods. She can provide a lot of utility with her kit being able to lock down areas and put her opponent in sticky situations by dispositioning them. She's very evasive, with her passive and the double jump and knockbacks. And then last thing here, she can provide healing and damage simultaneously, which is really great for healers to do. Now let's talk about the bad. And we're not talking about this kind of bad. So she has to play the mid-range to maximize her basics, meaning, like I mentioned earlier, you want to be able to heal your team while dealing damage. So you have to be a little bit close because you don't have that much range. And this will force you to become an easier target in the team fight. So balancing your cooldowns is going to be very important with her for sure. And you're limited on damage, when 1v1ing, meaning you don't have that much burst compared to other supports. And your kit is, I would say, more team coordinated to really get the maximum output of it. So just try and coordinate with your team. If not, worst comes to worst, you try to make plays on your own. Last but certainly not least, the ugly. This skin is alright. Personally, I prefer the default. Gameplay tips. You want to position yourself perfectly to take advantage of her projectiles with the boomerang effect. You'll quickly find it's difficult to keep your team healed up at times. You want her attacks to pass through your allies, both when casting and returning, to get the most amount of healing. But you also want to position yourself so you're dealing damage in the process to help alleviate the pressure of the enemy team. And in terms of the shield, you don't want to keep the shield remaining on the same spot for too long unless you really want to lock down an area, like with a Punisher turret. But keeping it from going on cooldown is essential. The passive healing boost it provides can't be understated, and using it to give your DPS characters to lock down an area or to one of your flankers to provide them with some cover and healing, especially for your flying characters, so they can, be a little bit more stationary and safe and always allow them to be healed up. And the ability to peek around areas without being easily contested is a huge reason to pick this character. This can allow you to get favorable trades on characters like Hawkeye and Hela. Lastly, Psionic Vortex. So you want to utilize this to deny doorways, corridors, wall peaks, and make the enemy team forced to play differently or force them out of cheeky positions. And then you can follow up with force physics to pull them in or away from your team. With this force physics, you want to pull enemies out of cover, bringing their tanks even further past the front line and potentially pushing close range enemies off your own tanks or healers. And DPS characters Give them room to maneuver. It's also important to pay attention to the ultimates of your team, as pulling or pushing enemies back into danger that otherwise might be on the edge of escaping could then change the difference from it actually hitting them or not. And then the invisible aspect of her kit really makes deliberate use of your double jump cooldown to go invisible to save yourself or set up a flank. I can't stress this enough. Using this outside of these situations and wasting them, its usefulness will often lead to backliner catching you quite easily once you're visible. So, again, use your invisibility more strategically to come. So, stay tuned and consider subscribing. Peace.